How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be talking about a really old classic horror movie, and this is Dead of Night from 1945. And this is an anthology horror film. Anthology horror from 1945. Really ahead of its time. Anthology horror would hit a huge boom in the 80s, but to do this in 1945, that's super early. This is from England's Ealing Studios and is directed by Alberto Cavalcanti, Charles Crichton, Basil, Dearden, and Robert Hammer. And the anthology stories in here, lots of good classic paranormal stuff, but we get some of them written by H.G. Wells and E.F. Bension. That's pretty cool. The movie stars Marvyn Jones, Michael Redgrave, and Roland Culver. And the setup, I think that's one of the first things I want to mention. This movie has a really good setup. There's this guy, he's an architect, and he gets hired to spend the weekend in a country house in the middle of nowhere to add some extra rooms to it because they have a lot of guests. Well, he arrives right before nightfall, he goes into the living room, and he recognizes the people there from his horrific reoccurring dream. He sees them, he's taken aback, and he says, "I know this room from my dream. I know all of you from my dream." But of course, dreams often fade upon waking, and he doesn't remember much of the details. He remembers a few other things that happen that may or may not happen in the coming time, but then the one thing that sticks into his head is somehow something is going to lead to absolute horror. But of course you can't remember what. Now, people treat this with varying levels of skepticism. You get a doctor who doesn't believe in any of it, but other people aren't that so much against it, and they start pulling out their own stories and they debate the supernatural, which I think is a really cool concept. The idea that you don't know for sure if the supernatural is real or not, that you'll do a skit, which is their stories, and then the characters will talk a little bit about the stories, which is super interesting as well. I really do love this framework. The is it real or not mirrors real life, also mirroring real life, is the idea that these random people would all have their own stories. And that is something super interesting when talking to people, is when you're talking to someone and then they pull out a strange story. That's always the coolest. Whoa, wait, you saw a ghost when you were 11? Tell me all about it. But yeah, I really do like this setup. And as far as anthology goes, this, not only is this a super early anthology film, it's really good with a consistent tone and idea, but also a good amount of variety. There's a haunted mirror in here. There's ghost. There's a comedy skit. That's all really interesting and different. But the one thing that people really remember this movie for, the thing that got me to pause when I saw this on the shelf in my used movie store and go, wait a minute, I remember that from somewhere. What is it that people talk about with this movie? Well, you flip it to the back. Ventriloquist dummy. Yes. And this is 1945 too. This is one of the first, if not the first, haunted ventriloquist dummy stories. Major step for creepy puppets and major step for haunted dolls everywhere. But yeah, 1945 haunted ventriloquist dummy, that's cool. And I believe R.L. Stine, creator of Goosebumps, even cites this as a key inspiration for creating Slappy. Cool, 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 cool. Obviously, a really great classic movie. Pretty good. And I won't spoil it, but leads to an absolutely epic ending. This movie's pretty fun. I guess without further ado, let's talk a bit about the shorts. I won't do any major spoilers, but let's take a minute and do little mini reviews for these segments. The first segment is Hearse Driver. In this story, the guy who's telling it says, because, you know, they're debating on if his dream predicts the future, and he goes, predicting the future? I have a story about that. So it ties it in naturally to their conversation and gives you a little clue as to what the story might be about. He talks about he was a race car driver, he got in a horrible wreck, and then he's recovering in the hospital, flirting with the nurse, but he seems to be doing better. But then, right before he gets out of the hospital, he hears something outside, goes to the window, and there's one lone, dark hearse on the road, nothing else there, and the hearse driver turns to him, looks right up at him, and says, "Room for one more, sir." A creepy vision, but what does it mean? This is one of those that's, you know, short, sweet, and to the point. Actually, the first two stories in here are a little bit short and to the point, but they do set up the atmosphere and the tone. It's a strange thing that has a really interesting payoff, and it gets people after the story's over to debate if it was all a coincidence or not. But a really interesting story, and also it is one that I've heard several different variations on before, so it does kind of have that, you know, sort of repeated horror story feel to it, you know, kind of like The Woman in White or something, just one of those stories you hear a bunch of times all slightly differently. It's cool, but a good, you know, paranormal story. The second one is called Christmas Party, and a quick note here is there are two different cuts of this movie. The original American theatrical cut of this movie actually cuts out the shorts Christmas Party and Golfing Story. Now, I have the Kino Lorber Blu-ray release. These two shorts are thankfully in there, and from what I gather, most versions of the movie have it, but if you get a version that doesn't have Christmas Party, you know you're watching the shortened one. So just check, you know, make sure that you got the whole movie. Anyway, Christmas Party opens up at a Christmas party. Of course it does. Young, dumb kids are partying. Good to know that all the way back in 1945, we still had young, dumb kids. Maybe the idea that people are changing is more of a myth than we think. I don't know. But these kids are partying, and one of them gets a game together. Reverse hide and seek. One girl, our main character, is going to go and hide. And then people try to find her, and then they hide with her. And eventually you're going to get one person looking for literally all of their friends, which sounds interesting. I don't know if the game logistically works, but if I was a kid, I might play it. But anyway, she hides, a guy finds her that lives at this house, and the guy says, "Did you know our house is haunted? Way back in time, a young girl killed her little brother and almost completely cut his head off." A gruesome story. And then he kind of makes a bit of a pass at her, and the girl runs off and leaves, where she'll meet a strange young boy. And I think we all know where this is going. I won't say if you can't figure it out somehow, but that being said, kind of tropey by today's standards. But back then, not so much. This is, you know, early ghost stories had a feel. They all had this kind of tone, and nowadays we know 100% where they're going. But that being said, it does lend, especially because it legitimately is from this time, it does lend to some classical, tropey nostalgia, you know? It's a fun, old story, even though we know exactly where it's going. And the Christmas party, with all the young kids running around, is a fun atmosphere. So again, I think this one is a little shorter like the previous one, and I think with these first two stories, you're more establishing tone than anything else. So we're getting paranormal, stuff like that, and just kind of listing these do you really believe it type of true stories. And then after that, for the last three, things get a little bigger and crazier. So speaking of the last three, story number 3 is The Haunted Mirror. Or just Haunted Mirror, no the. This fiance gives her husband a mirror, and husband-to-be, and he looks in the mirror and sees himself, but in a different room. So he can see this strange other room other than what's supposed to be in there, and that starts to freak him out. And of course, the wife has to go and find the story behind the mirror, and it leads to this pretty decent finale. Overall, a really good, super early haunted object story, and yeah, it's pretty cool. It is one, though, that I think about all the stuff we could do. If you were to remake this story nowadays, just think of all the stuff you could do with our modern effects. I keep wondering, what if you picked up the mirror and moved it around? All the cool stuff you could see. Could you leave the room? What would happen if, the doors didn't line up in the two rooms? Would the you in one world be affected by the you in the other? If you, in your world, were to position your hand to knock something over in the other, could you do it? I don't know, and it's something I'd be curious about, but of course they were limited by the technology of their time. But I really think you could do a whole cool, this is the me in the other world type story. That you could do so much with this nowadays. And of course there has been a ton of haunted mirrors since, most notably the movie Oculus. Go check it out, pretty good. Anyway, after that we have Golfing Story, and this is a comedy story. We get these two golfers that are super competitive because they're pretty much exactly the same. And then one day, a beautiful girl shows up, and they start to, they both want her, and because they're so similar, she can't choose. There's actually a really funny shot where they're debating what they should do, and the girl's just sitting between them as they're openly debating, just like, yeah, I have no idea either. What should we do, huh? It's a pretty funny shot. But anyway, they eventually decide, since they're big golf people, to play for her, and one of them is going to cheat. However, the other goes, well, since you won, bye, I guess, and just walks into the lake and kills himself. Like a cartoon. This is one of those things as you're watching the whole rest of the movie, and you're like, ah, yes, a nice, serious, classic, old ghost movie. And then the guy walks into the lake, and he just can't help but cracking up a little bit. And, of course, the ghost of the guy that killed himself is going to haunt his friend. And I have to say, one of the surprising things about this, it's actually pretty legitimately funny. Some old-timey humor doesn't hold up, but what does is classic. And I just, there's a few moments in here that you just get a chuckle out of you, especially some stuff towards the end is actually a little bit of adult humor that I'm kind of surprised they were able to get away with in 1945. So yeah, for the most part, it does hold up. Not 100%, but for the most part, a funny little sketch. And I also like how they frame it is like one of these guys is trying to break the tension, And that is something that would happen. You get a bunch of people telling scary stories. One guy's going to goof off and tell a funny story. So it works naturalistically and with the tone, and it's not just a funny story coming out of nowhere. It somehow fits, and I really did like it. This was the other segment that was cut out of the original American theatrical release, and I see why you could think that, going, oh, we gotta trim this down. Here's a weird, funny one. It doesn't fit. Get it out of here. But really, this is one of the better segments, And that was a mistake. Ah, man, you gotta have Golf Story. Anyway, the final segment, Ventriloquist Dummy. This is the classic one. This is the one that everybody knows, and it is really cool. They finally get the doctor talking, and he talks about this story where he meets a patient who was a world-renowned ventriloquist. But now he's locked up. What did he do? Well, we flash back in time further, and we meet him when he was a successful ventriloquist, doing his gags, doing his jokes, playing pretty well. He meets another ventriloquist, and the dummy starts to talk to the new ventriloquist like, hey, take me away with you. You have better career prospects. I want to be your dummy. And the ventriloquist goes, no, you're mine. Don't leave with this other guy. Which I think is a really cool concept, because most of the time, ventriloquism horror is like, get that puppet away from me. No, you will be my you will be my puppeteer. And the thing is, having it the other way around, where the dummy's evil, but the guy doesn't want him to leave him, that's funny, that's clever, that's creative. And of course, we know the drill with dummies. He's going to say something, get the ventriloquist in trouble, get him in a bunch of tight situations, and of course, as the movie goes on, do progressively creepier and creepier things. And when we get towards the end of the movie, there are some really creepy shots of the dummy at the end. Good stuff. But yeah, just, the idea of a ventriloquist dummy. We're gonna get this little uncanny valley puppet, and we're going to have the puppeteer move him around and interact with him like he doesn't know what the dummy's going to do and has no control over it. And, oh, you shouldn't say that. Quit it, dummy. It's a creepy concept inherently. Proud that the people who made this short realized it, and an advancement for creepy puppets in cinema everywhere. So, overall, a really great final short. And again, I won't spoil it, but when the host segments wrap up, boy, does it get intense. And I really do love the ending of this movie, because you think, okay, it's gonna have a decent ending, right? No. It is going to swing at the end, and it's a good twist you don't see coming, and then boy, do they push it, and the ending of this movie is super cool as well, with some, man, there's a few shots in the end there. They're great. So, if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend it. Not only is it a good movie talking about that, do you believe in the paranormal, but also good segments and super early examples of anthology horror and haunted dummies. So, that's cool. Gotta love ventriloquist dummies. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping the channel out. I'll leave a relevant playlist on the bottom. This should be my anthology horror playlist, where you can see me review other anthology horror movies like VHS, Trilogy of Terror, All Hallows Eve. I've actually covered quite a few anthology horror movies, so if you guys want to see more, you can click right here and see more. Anyway, have a good day now.